Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that I'm hosting live coaching sessions over at Gosu Academy, so if anyone wants to get some tips or advice from yours truly, then check out the links down in the description below. With that said, hope you guys enjoy the video. Last year, I made a video discussing champions who are always weak. Statistically speaking, they're pretty much routinely hovering below a 48% win rate, which are grounds for immediate buffs given that the inverse, a 52% win rate or higher, will put the champion under heavy scrutiny for nerfs. Now, in most cases, always weak champions are only so because of their disproportionate presence in pro play. To ensure there isn't a lack of diversity in picks, even if it's at the expense of their viability in solo queue, Riot tends to slam the nerf hammer on them for the sake of getting them out of 100% pick ban rate. The same can't be said for the opposite end of the spectrum though. Depending on the angle, you can justify champions always being weak if the alternative is them monopolizing champion select. Lesser of the two evils in a manner of speaking. But there's no legitimate explanation for why champions should always be strong in a game with constant balance changes, without making it feel like blatant favoritism anyway. But that just so happens to be the case for several cast members, enough to warrant making a video talking about them. Even though champions come and go all the time, some of them manage to stay very comfortably in the 51 to 53 percentile year round, regardless of the meta. And it's not like these are just very niche champions operated by a small handful of one-tricks. A good number feature consistently high play rates, yet are seldom if ever given nerfs. Today we're going to discuss always strong champions in League of Legends. So just like the last video, I want to remind everyone that win rate is not the be-all end-all when it comes to judging a champion's performance and health. It does play a role in determining the average of their potential, but some characters have a taller skill floor and/or ceiling that you have to consider. It's important to factor sample size into the equation as well. One of, if not the least played champions in the game is Aurelion Sol, who for the past 5 years has had a pick rate of less than 1%. However, he had also one of the highest win rates in the game during that time, hovering around an impressive 53 to 55%. While that's certainly worth taking note of, the low amount of games would suggest this isn't a good indication of his average performance. Chances are it's being inflated by the fact that the only ones who play Aurelion Sol are the ones who really like to play Aurelion Sol. You might be wondering, why are we looking at average power level when always weak champions are targeted based on the performance of the best of the best? I'll get to that in a moment. Back on topic, the easiest way to tell if a champion's over or underperforming is to combine their win rate with their pick and ban rate. If someone has a double-digit pick rate, say 15%, and their win rate is 53 to 55, that's when you know something is wrong. A good example of this was Zeri. When she was brought into the game in January of last year, she was so overtuned that not only did she have a 55% win rate in bot lane, but you also saw her in top and mid lane at a 53 to 54% win rate as well. And she had like a 25% pick rate in all three roles. Of course, that's an extreme case and a very short-lived one. Someone who has maintained a respectable play rate and win rate is Darius, an elder statesman of top lane. Since his rework in 2015, he's perennially held an average pick rate of 10%, making him one of the most widely used top laners. But throughout those 7 years, he stayed around a 50 to 52% win rate. It may not seem like that alarming of a range, given that the accepted variance according to most players is 48 to 52%. But what's intriguing is how Darius pretty much always stayed above 50%. I fail to remember a time when he was under 50% for more than a patch. Down in bot lane, you have Jhin, one of the most popularity carries of all time, with the pick rate routinely stationed between 10 to 20% if not higher, and an equally stable range of 50 to 52% win rate. Once again, Jhin hardly ever falls below 50%, and at times where it's 52 or higher, it doesn't stir that big of a commotion. I can think of about 2 or 3 examples of always strong champions for each role. Down in support, you have Rell, Bard, and Sona. Speaking of Sona, I think it's hilarious that everyone used to call Seraphine an infinitely better Sona despite Sona having consistently a higher win rate than Sarah, at least in support. Then in ADC you have the aforementioned Jhin, as well as Draven and Twitch, although Twitch and Draven's win rates are significantly higher in Diamond Plus compared to Gold or below, but my analysis is usually geared towards high elo anyway. Mid lane we have Kassadin, Akshan, and Anivia. Jungle you have Fiddlesticks, Rek'Sai, Skarner. Top lane we have Darius, Riven, Singed, and many more. To reiterate, some of them have lower pick rates like Skarner and Singed, but broadly speaking, everyone can think of at least 1 or 2 champions in every role that almost never gets nerfed despite how successful they are. Now we know the causality for always weak champions being mostly pro play. Certain cast members perform a lot more effectively in a more coordinated and methodical environment. It should go without saying that solo queue is vastly different from pro play beyond the addition of team communications. Top players are actively trained to find the most surefire way to consistently win games, and to maximize consistency, they lower the amount of uncertainty. That's often why you see 40-minute games that have only like 10 kills, and why players have insane CS per minute, because farming waves is a guaranteed way to accumulate gold, whereas kills are not only uncertain, but if you die, you actively set your team back. Solo queue is a lot different. Though it's still 5 versus 5, the random matchmaking and lack of voice comms means you have no way of formally communicating with your new team. Therefore, everyone takes it upon themselves to solo 1v9 games by accelerating their goal generation ahead of everyone else's. And the only way to do that is to go for kills, which is why solo queue is more fast-paced, chaotic, and most importantly, bloody. In pro play, you get 40-minute games with 10 kills or less. In solo queue, you can play a 40-minute game with over 100 kills. Why is this important? Most of the always good champs are seen very rarely in pro play. Occasionally, you might find them for a small stretch of time, but they rarely have more than a 30% presence, meaning their pick ban rate total is less than 30. This indicates two things. First, the champion's performance hinges on some semblance of discord. The absence of voice call prevents players from coordinating with each other clearly and quickly. Certain champions can take advantage of that, as evident by the assassin and diver classes being the two most popular in solo queue. They inherently rely on the element of surprise to be a threat. That can also extend to solo confrontations in general. Solo queue players are less likely to rotate around the map as a group. Odds are if you're playing a duelist or skirmisher like Riven or Kled, you'll have more opportunities to 1v1 and therefore build a lead to make use of later on. The limited communication also influences teamfights because you can't request for help or make calls in the heat of battle through typing or pings. It's basically every man for himself. Champions like Kassadin and Darius can be extremely dangerous if you give them even the slightest opening because Kassadin snipes the enemy backline at a moment's notice, and if Darius gets 5 stacks, especially towards the late game, he'll bulldoze your entire team. But if you pile your CC on Kassadin, you can explode him relatively early. And if you cut out Darius, he's not going to get those 5 stacks no matter how hard he tries. Taking these guys on requires heightened awareness and preparation, neither of which are present in solo queue. Second, always strong champs have a consistent game plan that doesn't vary too much based on circumstance, but they also don't have the potential to completely dominate with that game plan. This makes it less likely for them to get screwed over in champ select by either a bad team draft or counterpicks from the enemy team. If we look at Sona, she's a very neutral focused tempo enchanter, healing her team, speeding them up, contributing some chip damage on the side, and using her teamfight ultimate. In application, she doesn't have the same carry potential as Seraphine since her damage and area control is a bit worse. But there's never a situation where she's a bad choice for the team. Unless of course the enemy team is full of monster savages who can rush your team down in the blink of an eye. Singed is really good at sowing chaos in a game. His proxy farming habits can be difficult to handle for many players, and during teamfights he runs around gassing everyone while flipping people over, grounding them, and being a dick in general. But that's all he really can do. It works, but it's not something that Riot has to worry about since they know it won't be abused by a lot of players. Only those who hate society enough to watch it burn.
I just sat at the tower and I just was spamming live.
And they finish this one off. He's still safe inside.
The first reason explains how they achieve success, while the second reason explains how they manage to fly under the balanced team's radar. It's a very fine line they tread on, not like a champion who's strong in solo queue is weak in pro play. They may have fundamentally different goals, but it's still the same game. If you make it so Garen's ultimate did 100% max health true damage, you bet your ass he would have 100% pick ban rate in pro play because all he has to do is walk up to someone and they die instantly with 0 counterplay. If a champion is sufficiently broken enough, they will find a way into pro play. In other words, always strong champions are strong enough to have an above average win rate, but not too strong to where they start overstepping their boundaries. Going back to Zeri, she overstepped her boundaries by overperforming not just in bot lane, but also top and mid. If I could draw a weird analogy, it's kinda like how corrupt governments have deals with drug cartels and the mafia to allow them to get away with their stuff in exchange for staying within a certain area and not going into like, I don't know, the high-rise apartment neighborhoods or something. There's a few other causes for why they remain strong, one of which being the question of popularity. You may have heard of the 4 horsewomen of top lane, Fiora, Riven, Irelia, and Camille, a parody of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In Diamond 2+, they are some of the most common top laners you'll run into because they all have insane damage, good dueling potential, amazing mobility, and have a lot of skill expression. Despite how much everyone hates fighting against them, their commanding presence entails very high market value. High market value means more profitability in terms of skins and whatnot. A superstition people have with skins is that the moment you see a legendary skin released for an unpopular character, they're about to get nerfed. The 4 horsewomen of top lane get skins all the time because everyone plays them, but they don't get nerfed that much or as hard because Riot wants you to keep buying skins. I'm not saying they never get nerfed. Fiora recently got struck down a lot, but they never get nerfed to the point of obsolescence. Usually it's a slap on the wrist to bump them down from 53 to 51. Conversely, no one gives a crap about Yorick, which is why he's perma 48% win rate even though you'll never see him in pro play, while the 4 waifus of top lane are always in pro play and they have a high win rate in solo queue. That's just top lane. What about the other spots? Again, it depends on how invasive they might be in pro play. If we go by the logic of popularity, Lee Sin should not be underperforming as much as he is, but whenever he's strong, you start seeing him everywhere in pro play. On the other hand, ever since the rework to Rek'Sai, she's had very little presence in pro play, while in high elo solo queue, I think she's had like a 54% win rate for over a year. Public opinion also contributes to why Jhin never gets nerfed. No one has a problem with him thanks to his immaculate design. Statistically, he wins 51 to 52 games for every 100, but when playing against him, he doesn't feel very oppressive to go up against, so players are indifferent to it. Usually when someone has a 53 or 54% win rate, they're annoying as all hell, but Jhin doesn't come off as a very frustrating champion. Another cause would be their variance in performance. I mentioned earlier that my videos usually focus on high elos such as Diamond 2 and Plus. Personally, I'm of the school of thought that Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, and Platinum are all just one rank, and that the difference in player skill only gets noticeable when you're at Diamond or above. No disrespect to anyone below Diamond, that's just how I look at it. Although for some reason, the sentiment gets even more divisive the higher up you go. You get Master players calling Diamonds trash, and then Grandmasters calling Masters trash, and then Challengers calling Grandmasters trash, and then top 50 Challengers calling rank 200 to 300 Challengers trash. It's just relative. Anyways, my point is, due to the varying skill floors and ceilings of champions, some are likely to perform worse at low elo and better at high elo. Likewise, due to varying knowledge on counterplay, some are more likely to perform better at low elo and worse at high elo. A few patches ago, we had Dr. Mundo's mini rework, skyrocketing his win rate in Silver, Gold, and Plat to like 55% win rate overnight, but in Diamond Plus, he was at like 51. Obviously, one-dimensional stat checkers like Mundo are less effective in high elo, where players know when he's vulnerable and know how to punish him correctly. In this case, 55% win rate is still unacceptably too high, even though Mundo is a notorious noob stopper. But whether a champion should be balanced around low or high elo is a discussion for another time. Then we have Riven. Riven is legendary for how bad she is in low elo. I'm talking like 46% win rate. But in high elo like Master Plus, it's commonplace for her to have a 53 to 54% win rate since players have better control over their mechanical faculty. When you take the average play rate, it evens out to roughly 50%, explaining why Riven doesn't get too many buffs or nerfs, and whenever she does, it's by a small amount. So I guess in this scenario, Riven is simultaneously an always strong champion and always weak one. The final cause I can think of would be their individual circumstances. Just as always weak champions can only ever be functional if undertuned, always strong champions will only be picked if they're ever so slightly overtuned. Last year I talked about Hecarim's insane volatility, where he's super pick ban OP or never used at all. Once again, he's an extreme example of this, but illustrates the point the best in my opinion. Hecarim's a very straightforward champion, someone who literally weaponizes momentum to steamroll opponents and 1v9 games. Since he's easy to learn, players come out in droves to abuse him whenever Riot gives him a few buffs, and then drop him as soon as he gets nerfed. Based on this, one can infer that for Hecarim to maintain a steady play rate, he has to be somewhat overtuned. But in this case, the sweet spot for that is almost impossible to locate. You can give him a tiny ass buff of like 10 base damage or 2% bonus AD scaling, and everyone jumps on the mofo. Fortunately, not everyone suffers from such violent swings. Darius finds a healthy middle ground in terms of popularity and performance when he's around 51%. Jhin at 51 as well, Anivia at 52, Sona at 52, Singed at 53, so on and so forth. I find it fascinating actually. Everyone usually talks about the always weak champions, but as a game designer, it's a more challenging operation to thread the needle, especially for those who are very prone to exploding at the slightest nudge. Ultimately though, it's less about how strong or weak the champion is and more about how satisfying they are to play and how healthy they are to play against. Not many have a problem with the likes of Darius or Garen because they're very straightforward and easy to understand. People would rather have Anivia be strong than Akshan since Anivia is not as annoying to deal with and her pick rate stays the same whether she's overpowered or not. The more I think about it, the more I empathize with the Balance team. I like to roast them all the time when making questionable decisions, but trying to find the outcome where both solo queue and pro play, high elo and low elo are happy for 160 plus champions has to be a nightmare. It's easy to make a champion weak and keep them weak forever, but figuring out where is an appropriate spot for them to be strong is something I don't ever think will be possible, but that sure as hell doesn't mean they won't try. So what are your thoughts on always strong champions? Do you believe the concept should even be a thing, or should no champion ever be strong for a long time? Let me know in the comments down below. Aside from that, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my video on always weak champions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Take care.